So we're going to start off with this side view picture because that tends to be the diploma's preferred way of showing diagrams of reproductive anatomy. But keep in mind that there are two of some of these structures, and I'll show you a view from the front as well so that you can get a better idea of that. Now, if we consider the female reproductive system, females have two gonads just like males do. But in the case of females, they're the ovaries, which are number 6 on the diagram. So in this particular picture, they kind of look like a little cloud, a little flower maybe, if you're trying to compare it to something else. There are two of them, so there's one on each side. So in this side view, you can only see one of them. The ovaries produce a limited number of gametes. You might recall when we talked about meiosis that females produce all of their eggs kind of before they are born, but they are arrested in meiosis. They don't finish going through meiosis until a female reaches puberty, and they really don't finish meiosis fully unless they're fertilized. Now, the gametes that females produce are called ova, plural. Ovum is singular, so that's one of those words that has a weird plural. By alternating oogenesis. So what should happen, what is supposed to happen, is that about once a month, each ovary will release an egg, but alternating. So 1 month it'll be the left one, the other month it'll be the right one. Now the egg, once it's released, is released into the fallopian tube, which is number 5. So you can see this tube-like structure that starts at the ovary and then kind of loops around. That's the fallopian tube. Now, there's one fallopian tube on each side, so this would be another structure that there are two of. The process of the egg being released is called ovulation. And the fallopian tube have these little fringes called fimbriae. They kind of look like fingers. They're sort of long and swoopy, but they sweep the ovary to try to collect that egg, which means there's a possibility that the egg never gets into the fallopian tube. So that could happen. It's not supposed to, but it could. Now, the reason this is necessary is because the egg, we'll see in a minute, is not mobile. It can't move by itself, so it needs something to help its movement along. So we got the ovary, we got the fallopian tube. Does anyone have questions about those? If you have questions about ovulation, never fear, because there's basically an entire lesson just about the menstrual cycle and how that works. So we'll give some more details, especially about when it happens and why it happens as we move forward. Now, on this particular diagram, the uterus, I think, looks like an oven glove, like one of those little silicone things you put on your hand to reach in the oven. From the front, it has a different shape, but the uterus is this guy right here, number 7. The uterus is a muscular organ, so that's important. Most of it is made out of muscle. It will host and nourish the fetus if there is one. So if there's going to be a baby, which we will call a fetus eventually, that is where it's going to be. It is connected to the fallopian tubes, but also to the cervix, which is number 8. So if I follow the line for 8, it's pointing right here. The cervix is the opening to the uterus. And then that is connected in turn to this structure, the kind of grayish portion here. That's the vagina. So that would be the pathway that things follow. There's the ovary, fallopian tube, uterus, cervix, vagina. So that's where the egg goes. Well, egg doesn't usually go that far unless it's fertilized. But the sperm would go the opposite direction if they were trying to find the egg. Now the lining of the uterus, so if you look here, you can see that there are different layers to the uterus. The lining, so the inside layer of the uterus, which is called the endometrium. We'll see this term endo come up again. Maybe if you think about chemistry, you've heard it before, endothermic. Endo is what we use to talk about the inner layer or the inner lining. We have the endometrium, and this is the part that's richly supplied with blood vessels. It would be the place of implantation of a zygote. So we've seen the word zygote before. That's the structure that you get immediately when a sperm fertilizes an egg. The zygote will eventually turn into, for humans, what we call a fetus, but the initial structure is that little zygote. Now the myometrium is the middle layer. It's the muscle layer, and that will be important, not necessarily right now because we're talking about making eggs and sperm and fertilization, but eventually when we get to the point of talking about a baby being born, the uterus will need to contract to help the baby exit the uterus, and so that muscle layer will be really important for contractions. Now there are some external organs which you see down here, but they're not numbered on the picture. Collectively they're referred to as vulva, and it would include the labia, of which there are two, and the clitoris. And so the labia is this kind of structure here, and then the clitoris would be up there. They're not labeled on the diagram because you don't usually have to label them anywhere on a diagram. The other ones that I did label are the ones that you would need to identify. Now, if you have questions that you want to ask about ovaries, fallopian tubes, the uterus, cervix, vagina, or any of the information there, could you please ask? Yes?
The information given, but it's not labeled, would we need to know that?
Oh, not to label it on a picture, maybe just to recognize the words so that you know they're the external organs, but not to label on a picture. Anybody else want to ask anything there? So this is the view from the front. Obviously different artist representation, and I try my best to do that. This one's a little more cartoony looking. If we're looking from the front and we're focused just on the reproductive structures, because remember there's lots of other abdominal structures that would be in the way of this, but we would see that there are two ovaries, one on each side. The fallopian tubes wrap around from each ovary and lead to the uterus, which is this whole thing in the middle. And you can see from this angle really that there's a cavity in the center of the uterus. Then there's the endometrium, the inner lining, and then the myometrium, the muscle layer. So where it says uterus and it's pointing right here, really it's this whole entire thing. The cervix is the opening to the uterus, so the thing that connects the uterus to the vagina. And then the vagina would extend down further here, but this picture doesn't go all the way out to the external organs. Now, if you have a question that you want to ask about those structures, I would love to answer it. So on the surface, it might seem like, oh, it took us 5 times as long to talk about all the structures that a male has for reproduction. And that's true, we did. There were a lot of structures. However, when we talk about how those eggs are actually produced and what happens with them, the female side of the story will be the much, much longer side. So one of the outcomes says that you have to understand the distinction between sperm and egg cells. And so what I did, if you have the notes printed, you can see I gave you like a little list of characteristics about sperm and egg. The first characteristic that I'm giving on both of the slides is the size. Now this slide is about the egg. I could also have said ova, which is plural, or ovum, which is singular, right? I'm talking about the same structure. Now the first thing I give you is a measurement. I'm not expecting, nor is the diploma, that you memorize the exact measurement for the size of the egg. But when we compare it to the size of the sperm, hopefully you'll see the egg is way bigger. And I think most of you would already have known that just from our discussion of meiosis because of asymmetrical cytokinesis. So if we measure the diameter of the egg, which is from one side to the other, it's about 100 micrometers. And you can see that even the full length of the sperm from head to tail is not even close to that. And it's not a big round circle. Eggs will survive for about a day if they're not fertilized. That's it. So once ovulation happens, the egg needs to be fertilized within about 24 hours. Otherwise, that's the end of its life, and it's going bye-bye. There are some mitochondria. Why would the egg need that? Well, remember what the egg is supposed to do. The egg is the part of the duo that's going to bring all the cytoplasm when fertilization happens. So that's why we needed that asymmetrical cytokinesis. You have a particular number of eggs. Now there's a range. And again, the exact number is not what I need you to remember, but that there are a specific number present at puberty, and that's it. So it's not like an adult female can like make more eggs in her lifetime, because oogenesis has already happened mostly before she was even born. Now the eggs are all just hanging out waiting to finish going through the last part of meiosis. Eggs are not mobile. So I mentioned that before. The fallopian tubes needed the fringes or the fimbriae to sweep the ovaries to collect the egg, but the egg is not going anywhere by itself. Now, if we consider sperm, and we measure the length of a sperm from the head to the tip of the tail, it's only about 50 micrometers in length, so that's about half the diameter of the egg. So this picture that I've given here is a pretty good representation of proportionally how big the egg is compared to sperm. Sperm, like we already knew, have mitochondria to process fats before ejaculation and fructose after ejaculation to live 3 to 5 days. It's a pretty long time. Now that doesn't mean they're all going to live that long. It means that they could. They certainly could. They're equipped to live that long. So they're equipped with all those mitochondria. Now, you might look at the number and say, oh, that's not as many as the egg had, but remember, the egg is so much bigger, so much bigger. The sperm is tiny, and it needs those mitochondria to find the egg. Once it finds the egg has got all that cytoplasm to help support the developing embryo. Now, remember this fructose. Anyone remember where the fructose comes from? There's a little structure, it's an accessory organ. Sperm don't actually go in there, but it makes it. You can even look back at your notes. Your choices are prostate, Cowper's gland, seminal vesicle. Okay, it's not the prostate. You have a 50% chance of guessing correctly. Yes. Yes. So, seminal vesicle is the first one it goes past. That's where the fructose comes from. Now, in contrast to the eggs that were already present at puberty, and that's all she wrote, that's all she gets, millions can be produced of sperm every single day. So, kind of a big difference in number. Now, why do you think we need so many sperm? Well, you'll see, especially as we talk about the process sperm have to go through if fertilization is going to happen, they have this long, rather treacherous journey. First, they have to make it out of the male reproductive system, so they need some of the alkali fluid from prostate and Cowper's gland to neutralize the acids in the urethra. Then they have to get to the female reproductive system. That in itself is a hazardous journey. They have to make it through the acidic environment in the vagina. They have to go the correct way and not try to fertilize the wall of the uterus, which they will. They have to go down the right fallopian tube. Half of them won't. And so the sheer volume of them gives a better probability that one of them won't die, will get all the way to where the egg is, and will actually be able to fertilize it. And so because of that, clearly sperm need to be mobile because the egg isn't. For sperm and egg to meet, the sperm has to be the one that is moving, swimming along, looking for the egg. Now, if you have questions about this, I would really like to answer them. Okay, so I showed you in your notes for the male reproductive system some like zoomed in views on what's going on inside the testes. But what I'd like to do next is show you some actual microscope slides that aren't cartoon drawings. These are real actual cells. So